So can I just get a bit of an idea? I know that the VGTR has been talked about in some of the previous talks, so roughly everybody in the room will now have heard of it, but before people showed up, did everybody know about the video games tax relief scheme in the UK? Has anybody applied for the cultural test yet? Okay, one, okay, two. Yeah, so I just want to talk everybody through it in case it's relevant to you and what you can get. So there are a few points that you need to hit before you consider applying. You need to have a video games development company that's based in the UK, registered with Companies House. There's a minimum of 10% core expenditure, and core expenditure refers to expenditure that's immediately involved in developing the game. So programming costs, design costs, testing, stuff like that, but not marketing or other costs along those lines. The video game needs to be intended for supply to the general public, so it needs to be publicly available for anybody to buy. If it's priced at a premium for a smaller market, like specialist education stuff, that can still qualify as long as it is publicly available. And the final thing before you actually apply for a tax relief claim is that you need to it needs to be qualified as British through the cultural test, which is what the British Film Institute administers. So what it's worth, and I know this was talked about before as well, but I'll just run back through it quickly, is that you get the tax relief rate is 25% of your core expenditure. But the total qualifying amount is capped at 80%, so I still haven't found an elegant way of actually expressing this to people. If you want to work out roughly how much it can be worth, if you assume all of your expenditure is core, it's about 20% back, which is what was discussed earlier in some of the talks. So the test itself is a 31-point test. It's highly prescriptive, which means it can be more understandable to get through than something like R&D. But it's separated into 4 sections. The first section is cultural content, which is broken down into 4 again after that. But it's for what the player actually sees and experiences in the game. That's what it's concerned with. So the first one is setting. So you get points towards passing the cultural test if it's set in the UK, but also if it's set in something that's referred to as an undetermined location. And particularly for a lot of mobile games, that can be really helpful, because undetermined location generally means something like a science fiction or fantasy setting, something that can't be ascribed a nationality. But it's also extended to mean sort of like quite generic settings, which a lot of mobile games will sort of fall into. So things like Clash of Clans. The setting is kind of broadly sort of cartoonish fantasy. You can still qualify for setting points with that. You don't get ruled out because it's not explicitly set in the UK or Europe. The second one is for characters, and that follows the same sort of thing as setting. You've got points for UK or EEA, and then also points for undetermined characters. The third part is for underlying material, and it's kind of a very general term, but if you can't get any points for setting or characters, generally you can still make up enough points to pass the test as long as your studio is based in the UK. So underlying material can refer to a broad range of things. For film, it generally refers to a script, because the tax relief is available on film as well. It's generally a script, but in video games it can be a wide range of things: a design document, a script, a game, but even just a concept or prototype or something that was come up with during a game jam. There are a lot of options, and we try to help developers be able to claim those points as long as a member of their studio has come up with the underlying concept for the game. So if you've taken a look at the cultural test, or if you subsequently take a look at it and it looks like you don't have documentation or you don't think you can qualify, I'd encourage you to get in touch with us, and then we can talk about whether or not there's maybe something you've overlooked, because it's really specialized for this process, so it's not something you'll have an awful lot of experience with beforehand necessarily. The fourth part is just for language. As long as the game is presented in English, whether it's American English or UK English, and if it's localized for other territories, then as long as there is an English option, it's fine. You don't get penalized for having 5 language options as long as English is one of them. Or it's English or any of the UK indigenous languages, so if you want to make something in Welsh or Cornish, you don't get ruled out for that either. The next section is cultural contribution, which is kind of quite a vague section. It's a good place to pick up points if you're just shy of the pass mark, but it requires you to sort of put a lot of input to sort of justify why you're being given the points. They're awarded for cultural creativity, which is for doing unique or envelope-pushing stuff in terms of content or technology. Cultural heritage, which is for featuring things that relate to British heritage. And then there's cultural diversity, which is if you're able to either behind the scenes or on screen demonstrate that you're representing factors of diversity, you can get points there as well. Cultural hubs is essentially just where do you spend money making the game. So you'll get points for spending money, your programming expenditure being incurred in the UK, design expenditure, storyboarding, conceptual development, as well as audio production, music recording, and voice recording. So if you're spending money on those things in the UK, you can qualify for points there. And then Section D is about the nationality and residence of the people working on the game. So it's things like project leader, script writer, lead artist, lead programmer. If those people are UK or EEA citizens or they're resident in the UK or EEA while you're making the game, then you get points there. So essentially, if your studio is based in the UK or EEA and you have a company based in the UK, there's a good chance you'll be able to pass the test. So if on first glance, you've thought that maybe it wasn't accessible to you, it's definitely worth looking through it. It's definitely worth sending us an email to see if you'll be able to get through and then ultimately claim back that 20%. So the way you actually do it is it's an online application form. If you search for, one of the quickest ways to find it is just to search for video games cultural test on Google, and it's the first link that comes up. There's about a 4 to 6 week turnaround time. That's generally just due to the volume of applications we get, so make sure you allow for that when you apply. You can apply for interim, so the way you can apply for an interim certificate or a final certificate. And the way that's split up is sort of very, very formal in the wording. It's interim as if the game is in development, final as if the game is completed and shipped. But particularly for the mobile market, that distinction can be quite vague, is when it's shipped the first time it's released, what about if the development is ongoing? And in order to accommodate for that, if you're using a games as a service or an ongoing development model, then you can apply for either certificate at most points during development. Interim would be, we only consider it complete when we've done the final update, but final would be, we've released it on this date and there are residual costs that involved in maintaining the product, but those costs there's no cap on what that can consider. We'd recommend just consulting with your whoever does your finances to figure out which is better for you. But again, you can talk to us. It's meant to be, it's an open process, and we want to make sure that you're issued with a certificate that works for your company the best. There's a whole big, thick guidance note document. I really recommend reading it when you're doing the application. You can stop doing paperwork as soon as you hit 16 points. You don't need to fill out the whole application. There's a bunch of supporting documentation that we need. It's all detailed on the website, but it's stuff like budget, schedule, something that gives us, particularly when you're applying for interim, if the game isn't out, we just want to get an idea of what the game is and what the experience for the user is going to be. All this stuff is detailed on the website, so if you want to find out more, just look us up. There's also there's a sort of legal and hard copy requirement as well, where because this is ultimately something where you get paid money in tax relief. You need to do a legal declaration that says all this stuff is true. So you might need to read up on that somewhere, but it's not that involved a process, and we have a lot of templates for all of this stuff on the website if you're struggling with it. So I just thought I'd end with some statistics this is from Q1 to Q3 2015. We track some of the stats, but we're sort of building out exactly what we track and what we're able to publish. So the stats are quite coarse grain at the minute, but in that period we certified 172 games, 77 were final, 95 were interim. The total budget across all games for interim was 458.7 million, but the median budget is 0.6 million. So we get a big spread of sizes of game and sizes of budget, and the tax relief and the cultural test really are meant to be open to anybody applying. There are no lower limits on your budget. The nature of the game is very broad. The cultural test is very open, and if you were concerned that you wouldn't be able to pass it, as I said before, please get in touch. But that's me. So if anybody has any questions, I hope we maybe have time for a couple. If anybody just wants to come and chat, we should be around the place. If you want to come into the BFI, we're always happy to meet people to go through a specific application or to cover whatever points or things you might have questions on. But does anybody have any questions now? I think this one at the back.
There we go. Hi. We already quite aggressively pursue the R&D tax credits.
Okay.
Because if you could explain how the two tax credits overlap and interact, and whether it's worth it for us. Essentially, that's what I need to try and work out.
At the BFI, we don't really work with the R&D tax credits at all. There were some other talks that dug into it. I mean, I can give you a broad overview, but definitely not an expert response. But the R&D stuff is for it's for presenting something new. It's for like innovative technology, and there's a big burden on you guys to demonstrate that you're pushing technology forward with it. The video games tax relief itself is more prescriptive than that. It's essentially if you're making it in the UK, you can apply. The main thing to remember is that you can't double dip on expenditure. So if you've claimed R&D tax relief on a lot of your programming expenditure because it's pushing technology forward, you can't then claim video games tax relief on that portion of the expenditure. But any other programming expenditure that isn't involved in that aspect of R&D, you should be able to claim on. Whether or not it's worth it for you really comes down to the bottom line of working out how much the tax relief is going to give you back, and it's claimable on design expenditure, programming expenditure. It's anything that isn't claimed on an R&D that is eligible, it doesn't rule you out in any way. So whether or not it's worth it is just comes down to a bottom line calculation of is 20% of these qualifying costs worth the very low administrative costs plus the time investment. And if it is, I'd encourage you to go for it. Anything else? Do we have time for one more? There's one at the front.
Is it a deduction from profits or some kind of refund?
It could be either, depending on whether the game is loss-making or in profit when you claim the tax relief. So for interim games, obviously, if it hasn't been released, there's no profit coming in on that trade. So it will be a payable tax credit, but if it's in profit, then it can be a deduction as well. We good? All right, thanks, everybody. Cheers.